From courtside of the virtual hardwood, it's the NLSC Podcast, a weekly show for basketball gamers and hardcore hoopheads. This is episode 595. I am Andrew in our forum, Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. I'm joined as always by my co-host Derek, Diva3 in the forum, and Diva3G and Diva384 on X. Derek, NBA 2K26 is already in the hands of gamers who bought the Superstar and Leave No Doubt editions. I went for the Standard edition myself, so I haven't played it yet. However, you have, so we can talk first impressions this week. To that end, please tip us off.
Yeah, so this episode will be centered around NBA 2K26 early release impressions. I received the game, Andrew, on August 29th and have put a lot of hours into it at this point. However, before we get to that discussion, I learned a new term, Andrew. This, from my understanding, is a Generation Alpha term. For those who are unaware, Generation Alpha includes kids born between 2010 and 2025. So I was walking out of my local Adidas store, and a kid, probably between 8 to 10 years old, held the door open for me, much to the delight of his mother, who appreciated his show of kindness, Andrew. However, his demeanor changed once he took a longer look at me. He said excitedly, "Aura farming," followed by repeating it like 8 more times. Aura farming, aura farming, aura farming. I had never heard this term before, but apparently it was because I was wearing sunglasses, and to this kid, maybe trying to be a little too cool. So this prompted me to look up what aura farming is, Andrew. So NDTV shares this story behind aura farming. To understand aura farming, one must know what aura is. It is a term often used by Gen Alpha to quantify somebody's cool factor. For example, my friend Anna is cool as she has a lot of aura. Meanwhile, the term farming comes from gaming, where players collect resources or points. Aura farming applies this concept to collecting social admiration. It's like collecting cool points, Andrew. Aura farming refers to striking a dramatic pose, often in reference to an anime character, to exude epic energy and doing something impressive while acting like it's nothing. The trend is about looking unbothered, confident, and charismatic. So examples of aura farming that were included were Michael Jackson's entrance at the Super Bowl, actors like Timothée Chalamet or Darth Vader making intimidating entrances or poses, and social media trends where users post curated images or videos to project a cool vibe. Lastly, aura farming is popular because it offers a cool, authentic way to gain social status by projecting effortless confidence, a desirable trait in the digital age. The trend, which combines a term from gaming, referring to repeating actions to level up, which is another term often used by Gen Alpha, Andrew, leveling up, with the concept of a person's unique aura, allows people, especially young generations, to cultivate a magnetic and captivating presence without appearing to be trying too hard. But yeah, apparently, aura farming can also be negative. So, as another article pointed out, aura farming isn't inherently a bad thing. It can be seen as a form of self-expression and cultivating a desired image, but it becomes bad or cringe, Andrew, when it's perceived as overly artificial, trying too hard, or involves dangerous behavior. The trend, popular with Gen Alpha, originates from gaming and TikTok and can be a compliment if done well, but a dig when it's obviously a forced attempt to appear cool or impressive. So did this kid think I was cool or impressive, Andrew? Or did he think I was forcing it? We will never know, but apparently I was aura farming.
Let's just say that it was positive. Let's just assume that is the context. I mean, sunglasses are classically cool. I guess it's really just the latest version of being a tryhard. You know, that's what we used to say back in the 90s. You know, being a tryhard, trying too hard to be cool. Nothing new under the sun. The terminology changes, just like cringe. As I said in our Discord, cringe, what used to be lame, or hella lame for a while when South Park made that popular, with Cartman saying it a couple of times in the early seasons. And of course, before that, it was square. And is it hip to be square, as Huey Lewis and the News once sang. So yeah, it's kind of weird to just say that when you just see someone wearing sunglasses. A very standard thing to do, you know, when it's sunny out, just to put sunglasses on to shield one's eyes. You know, that is something we are encouraged to do with the Slip, Slop, Slap rap. That's rap with a W campaign here in Australia, which of course is slip on a shirt, slap on a hat, slop on some sunscreen and wrap your eyes with glasses to protect yourself from the hot Australian sun. So yeah, if it was negative, that's really weird to be yelling that, and to be just yelling that at somebody in public anyway. But yeah, that is how it is in 2025, I suppose, and it makes me feel incredibly old.
Yeah, I mean, I did some pretty silly things from the ages of 8 to 10, around there. So I could see myself doing something like this when I was that kid's age. But to this kid, Andrew, I may have not leveled up this day.
I guess you just need to buy that season pass, Derek.
Speaking of season passes, Andrew, NBA 2K26 impressions. So before I go in depth, I just want to say, I swear they just bring back parts of motion systems from old games. Call it new or an enhancement. Recycle. Repeat. The consistent and ridiculous and unrealistic bumping that was in 2K24, where most of the time you turn a corner, you hit an invisible wall and get bumped backwards, is back in 2K26. Also, just the constant bumping when you try to turn a corner in general, and then not being able to take advantage of mismatches where, say, you have a fast guard and getting guarded by somebody like Zubac, and he's just shutting you down any angle you try to take. And that shutdown is usually a bump. The 2K24 contest system under the rim appears to be back, feels almost identical, where you constantly miss easy layups, regardless of layup timing being on or off, and the type of contest doesn't even seem to really matter. And that was a killer in 2K24, and it appears to be back in 2K26. They took away the height matters on outside shots, which was a great feature in 2K25, and it feels like they reverted back to how shooting works in those scenarios in 2K24. Andrew, I put 2K24 and 2K26 on back-to-back to test, and the similarities are crazy. It's like, oh, we need to make the game look and feel different than 2K25. Let's run some of the 2K24 gameplay features back in 2K26 and call it new. I always give games a chance. I have already put a lot of hours into this game, Andrew. Tweaking things like game speed, doing other slider tweaks, messing with difficulty levels, playing different ways, etc. But yeah, I just feel like this entire gen of 2Ks overall has been suspect in so many ways. I'll say one thing, something that's always consistent in each of the games, the microtransactions and the intentional grind. That is always consistent. I've received quality feedback on the gameplay videos that I've posted, whether it be the gameplay video on YouTube or highlights on Twitter, etc. And people like my footage, and people think it looks good overall. And I can make this game look good at times. I also want to point out that others have stated that my gameplay is high quality. So this isn't a matter of Derek doesn't know what he's doing on the sticks, or Derek needs to learn the game more, etc. That is not what it is. I can provide examples, which I'm going to, of the issues that I'm discussing. I'm going to give this game a chance, and I do like some things about it because they're very similar to things that I liked in 2K25. But this is going to be mostly a cons list because I don't like the added frustrations. So I downloaded the game on August 29th and have played many hours on it. I played multiple co-op and head-to-head games against my brother and multiple games against the CPU. I've also taken a quick look at the rosters. I'm going to give my early access gameplay impressions right now, but I first wanted to say this. How disappointing is it to read officially published announcements related to the game, whether it be dev blog related or otherwise, where they're boasting major changes and enhancements just to get your hands on the game and realize it was mostly BS. It's mostly false advertising. And the reason for that false advertising is mostly there to get people to pre-order the game. I also find the lip service during this preview season provided by those who were invited to Community Day, those who got perks and access and added exposure from 2K, insulting. I think a lot of people feel this way once they get their hands on the game. Some expressed it while they were watching the early gameplay footage as well. And it's just blah. Andrew, so many of the creators provided top tier shilling. It's unreal.
And we are in the honeymoon phase of the release. And when I say that, I don't mean that anybody who is enjoying the game is wrong or is necessarily shilling. If you are enjoying the game so far, that is absolutely your right to hold that opinion. We all have different standards. We all have different expectations. We're all playing different modes. So I'm not going to tell anybody who is enjoying the game it's wrong. But when it comes to the honeymoon phase, we do see people shutting down criticism, saying this is the best game ever, refusing to acknowledge any issues with the game, and basically saying things that they're going to go back on in a couple of weeks, or certainly a month to 6 weeks. People are going to start acknowledging those flaws. And the same people that said, oh, you're just hating on the game, this is perfect, this is the best NBA 2K ever, after the first couple of weeks, 2 to 6 weeks tops, you start getting those more nuanced takes on the game.
Yeah. So the majority of responses as it relates to the gameplay are not positive from what I can tell on social media. But a lot of the content creators are really, really shilling for this game before the early access hit and after. So last week, we discussed a comment from one of these people who tweeted out that if you thought NBA 2K26 looked like NBA 2K25, you were dumb or you sucked at the game or both. I didn't need to get my hands on the sticks to know that this game looked and played a lot like 2K25. We talked about this last week. But now that I have played for hours, I can tell you that the game's feel is about 90% 2K25, maybe more. But hey, this guy with 1 million YouTube followers told anybody who believes the two games look alike is dumb or sucks at the game. So Andrew, I must be an idiot, right? But let's get real. The reality is that this guy will do whatever he can to get clicks and suck up to his sponsors. It was also announced during preview season that this game has a new motion system. This borderlines on false advertising because if a new motion system was used, as you alluded to last week, it used close to 100% of the bones from 2K25's motion system. They also stated that skating had been removed from the game, which I will say right now doesn't border on false advertising. It is false advertising. Look at the player's feet on any gameplay video you watch. When you get on the sticks, move around the court on offense and defense, and look at the player's feet. The players are skating and sliding all over the place. Oftentimes, it looks like they are floating above the court. In fact, and I'll show video of this, when you go into instant replay, you can see the players' feet often not connecting with the floor. They're just like sliding and shuffling around awkwardly and whatnot. Even if they're supposed to be standing still, their feet are still moving and they're like sliding around. So yeah, those two major announcements related to gameplay, Andrew, I'm calling it right here on the NLSC podcast, false advertising.
Yeah. And how many people in a year's time are going to recognize that and go back to the developer blogs and point out these issues? Certainly not the content creators with a huge following who rely on access and enjoy the perks of working with 2K. And like you say, that is why they're not rocking the boat here. I'm not surprised. We both felt that that was going to be the case from a lot of the early gameplay footage. As we discussed last week, when we were talking before we started recording, you mentioned messing with the sliders a little bit, the body up sensitivity, as you've done in recent years, putting that all the way down, kind of being a band-aid fix and improving things slightly, but nowhere near enough, and not feeling that improvement, which is dismaying to hear, absolutely, but I can't say I'm surprised.
Well, the body up sensitivity slider in 2K26 almost feels like a placebo. I put it to 0, trying to see if I can get rid of some of that suction, some of the invisible walls, and it really didn't do much at all. Not even close to as much as it did in past games, but we'll get to that in a moment. So I'm going to get to the cons first because we're already talking about some of them right now. I do want to point out, though, before I bring up these items, there is enough 2K25 in here, enough of the things that we liked about it, where I will probably still put time into this game. Remember, I'm an offline player, Andrew, right? And, my brother Mark loves the WNBA right now. He's a huge Caitlin Clark fan. And we'll probably have a co-op season with the WNBA roster. And my brother and I may go against each other using the current teams. And you'll see why we're talking about the current teams, when I get into the feedback. But yeah, let's get to the cons. So 1, you are constantly hitting invisible barriers in this game, similar to 2K24, but often worse. You try to turn a corner on a defender, and there is an invisible wall that stops your forward progress. The defender isn't even facing the right way. And in real life, you would easily just get by. but you are stopped in your tracks. And if you try to go up for a shot in this case, your offensive player often takes a wild shot, a contested shot animation, even though your defender is out of position and isn't doing anything. When you try to do post moves, the invisible barrier, which is accompanied by suction, will more often than not dictate the results. Very rarely does it have anything to do with real basketball movements or skills in that moment. The invisible wall issue affects gameplay dramatically. It's happening consistently throughout the game.
Again, so much for that new technology. And of course, it may be new tech under the hood, but as we've said before, if it's designed the same way, according to the same principles, utilizing the same design ideas, then it's going to resemble the previous game. So again, not surprising, but certainly dismaying.
No, I don't think this is new tech overall. I think it's the same tech with possibly smaller new tech involved with the old tech that was used, meaning, we did lower body posing in order to try to, eliminate some of the skating. What they said, they eliminated the skating. Complete and total BS. Unbelievable false advertising.
So one of those situations where it's technically accurate to say there's new technology, but really overselling it.
Oh, absolutely. Right. It's mostly the old tech with possibly one new integration and whatnot. But again, the skating is the next con, so let's get to that. So skating, despite 2K announcing skating has been removed, the foot planning is incredibly poor in 2K26, and it can be felt and seen on both offense and defense. As stated when talking about prior 2Ks, this impacts decisions and outcomes on the floor in a major way, and it impacts control. Suction, Andrew, as stated prior. Suction is bad and often accompanied by invisible walls, which is mostly noticed in the half court. However, and I know this is one of the things you have really disliked over the last 5 or so years, Andrew. You and I have talked about it many times. The artificial suction that takes place on drives to the hoop and on fast breaks, where you are clearly ahead of the defense for an easy layup or dunk, but the game suctions a defender to you and it becomes heavily contested or you get blocked.
Yep.
This happens a lot in NBA 2K26. The body up sensitivity slider appears to not do much for this at all, almost seeming like a placebo type thing. So, yeah, absolutely ridiculous how often it happens in this game. So the next one, Andrew, janky movement. I still can't believe that a sports game released in 2025 has human movement that looks like this. However, it's not surprising to me that none of the reviews for these games or any of the shills bring it up. The players move so awkwardly, changing directions with and without the ball. Movements often have a ridiculous hitch in them. When you have the ball and change directions with the dribble, the player movement isn't even logical a lot of the time. I don't get how this isn't touched on more. And this isn't the way it's always been. These crazy, janky player movement issues started with 2K18, but really ramped up starting in 2K20. To go along with the janky movement is the players running animations being completely out of whack. You'll be on the fast break or driving to the hoop, and your players go from a push animation to having his back completely straight like he's going to start walking, back to pushing animation, etc. It looks and feels ridiculous. And you don't even have as much of that in a game like NBA 2K9, which we have a season going right now, right? We have an association on that game. You don't even see a lot of this unrealistic movement, janky movement in a game that came out over 15 years ago. It is so frustrating. And I know you like your wrestling games, Andrew, right? And I've watched footage of WWE 2K17 and compared it with footage from like WWE 2K19 and moving forward. And you can't even believe the difference in foot planning and, and like better movement overall in those wrestling games where it's less janky and everything, from the 2K17, that old motion system, to the new motion systems in the WWE games. And it really shows that in so many ways that the tech hasn't gotten better. And I think you would agree.
Absolutely. And it's ridiculous that games have gone so far backwards in that sense. There have been other visual improvements, obviously, but to see the sliding, to see that lack of foot planting, and of course, it's not just a cosmetic thing, as we've said before. It's not just a complaint about the aesthetics of the game. This does affect gameplay with NBA players, or WWE wrestlers, as the case may be, sliding and snapping into place, that does affect the gameplay by putting them in a position that gives them an advantage or a disadvantage, as the case may be. So it's not just a case of, oh, it doesn't look good. As we've said before, it does impact the gameplay in so many ways. You look at players who are sliding around, CPU defenders don't think they're moving because their feet are stationary, but they're sliding away, creating space, creating gaps to drive or have that open jump shot. It absolutely impacts gameplay. It's not just a visual nitpick. And the fact that we've gone backwards over the past couple of generations of games, be it basketball or wrestling, really is disappointing. As you know, Derek, a lot of people love to say, new is always better. It's only nostalgia. You only think these old games are better. But you can put footage side by side. You can see less skating and better foot planting in old games. You can see...
And less janky movement.
Absolutely.
It's a more realistic human movement.
Better AI. You can see a lot of great tech and great gameplay in old games. Sure, the faces might not be as good. The player models might not look as realistic, although that's not always the case. We've seen some games from the past couple of generations have very disappointing body types. They may be higher resolution, I suppose, than older games, but they're not necessarily realistically proportioned or whatever. But the fact that it's gone backwards like this, not just visually, but also from the feel on the sticks and the impact on gameplay and trying to contend with this stuff from a strategic standpoint and from a stick skills standpoint, and the fact that it's not being called out on top of that, yeah, it's very disappointing.
Yeah, and I feel bad for the online players, right? Because, these issues with the player movement and everything has to make that scene so frustrating to be in, right? Like to have your hands on the sticks and the offensive player moving unnaturally and so fast all around the court, while on defense you're kind of like just sliding all around, trying to stay in front of these unrealistic moving offensive players and everything. Like, I feel bad for those in the online scene that have to deal with these controls and the way this motion system works. So, Andrew, let's get to the next one, the steal system. This system tells me that the base gameplay is almost completely tailored around the online modes, with offline mostly being an afterthought. But with that being said, the majority of comments I have seen from those playing online as it relates to this are still incredibly negative. Press steal to foul is an understatement in 2K26, especially on difficulty levels All-Star and up. If you go for a steal that makes sense, the offensive player will often unnaturally jerk out of your way, or it will be a foul. It doesn't matter if the offensive player is just mindlessly dribbling or holding the ball in place. Do not go for that steal. You won't get it. Most of the steals you will get are going to be AI steals in the passing lanes, or awkward steals you get when playing off the ball. It's also important to know that they have slowed down the animations as it relates to attempted steals. Swipes are delayed and are incredibly slow, not even close to how it looks in real life. And this goes for your swipes on the ball or in the passing lanes. Incredibly disappointing steal mechanics. Again, this year, Andrew, and actually worse than NBA 2K25 from my experience.
And that has become a huge problem over the past 10 years or so, catering to the online scene, or trying to cater to the online scene, because as you noted, there are still complaints from online gamers feeling that these mechanics aren't doing the job, but trying to tailor everything around user versus user gameplay. And I understand that the competitive scene, the online scene, is important these days. There are a lot of people playing online, so you do need to cater to those preferences. You do need to provide a stimulating competitive scene, but the impact to the offline gameplay, the sim-oriented gameplay, has been such a huge problem over the past couple of generations, catering to that online elitist crowd who wants the game to play a certain way. They don't care about realism, they don't care about authenticity, and they look down on simheads and call them the casuals. But to that point, it is funny that it also impacts them, and they end up complaining about that as well. But again, I hate that catering to the online competitive scene and the elitists and the gatekeepers in the online scene has impacted the gameplay so negatively.
Honestly, Andrew, I'm sick of the sim versus non-sim. We're talking about basketball. People just want to play basketball. I'm sick of it. Yeah. I'm absolutely sick of that stupid stuff. It's so stupid. It's basketball. Continuing on. Defense. So I just wanted to touch on this. The computer moves a lot faster than you laterally, especially on the higher difficulty levels, because the AI doesn't have to deal with input delay and isn't impacted as much as it relates to the skating. So the core motion engine issues as it relates to your control on the sticks can get super frustrating, even more frustrating when playing the CPU on the higher difficulty levels. Also, and I know you really hate this, Andrew, you're not going to like it again. Just to let our listeners know, Andrew hasn't played this game yet, but I am predicting that he will not play this game. I'm predicting that you will not put a lot of hours into this game. I predict that you are going to put it down really fast, and the same frustrations, if not more, that you have had, with the recent 2Ks. They'll still be there. But the random letter generator on alley-oops on All-Star and above is just super unnecessary. We should be able to turn off the meter offline. Obviously, this still isn't an option. I also feel the same way about the meter as it's connected to contact dunks in traffic when pulling back on the right stick. We should have an option to turn that meter off. And we don't have that option. So you got a bunch of ugly meters when you're doing things in the paint, and they're large and they look silly. So just wanted to throw that out there. I also don't think it adds to the realism, right? and I also don't think it's truly related to skill gap either. But continuing on, layup timing. Because of all the invisible walls, the suction, and the unnatural speed of so many of the animations, I don't think it works as it should. It still feels broken for the most part. It feels like it's not user-friendly in any way or realistic in any way. So for those playing offline, Andrew, I recommend turning off layup timing.
It wouldn't surprise me if next year we find out that was kind of a Band-Aid fix for some kind of defensive problems with the defensive AI or the defensive mechanics, shot contest mechanics, what have you. We saw that before with NBA 2K18 and NBA 2K19. That's why I centered my video, The Lies of Developer Blogs, around 2K18 and 2K19, one of the most blatant examples of lies in developer blogs. And we're already seeing some examples with NBA 2K25 to NBA 2K26, from the alleged new motion tech to issues with shot timing and the removal of skating and things like that. So yeah, your prediction about me not spending a lot of time with the game, I'm keeping my expectations low and keeping an open mind. But yeah, seeing your gameplay footage, hearing you talk about it now, that's a pretty solid prediction, I fear.
So yeah, the whole thing about Band-Aid fixes is I feel like doing this with the steal system, as in making it almost impossible to get steals, it has nothing to do with making the game realistic. And it has nothing to do with skill gap. In my opinion, it's more they didn't know how to fix it to make it more realistic when it comes to steal animations, when it comes to how to get steals, all of that stuff. And they didn't want to work on making that more realistic and more intuitive and make it make sense. So their fix is, now everything's going to be press steal to foul. Now everything's going to be, you try to go for an on-ball steal and the offensive player will just unnaturally jerk away. Nope, you can't get that. It doesn't matter how good you timed it. This has nothing to do with skill gap. It has nothing to do with realism. It's a Band-Aid fix.
And you know how I feel about the alley-oop timing, that whole concept. And to hear that changing it up with different face buttons, that you need to press the right button every time instead of just pressing the shoot button, we predicted that would be silly, and we said it was unnecessary. I'm not surprised to hear that it is disappointing. It certainly turns me off throwing alley-oops in the game. And to your point, no, it doesn't cater to the idea of a skill gap. It's still a QuickTime event. It's even more of a QuickTime event now that you're adding different buttons. What does that have to do with strategy? What does that have to do with basketball? Why are we making alley-oops more difficult that way? Why are we not allowing the offline gameplay to be tailored? Oh, you don't have superior stick skills. Who cares offline? Do what you want in the competitive scene. Make that more challenging if you want, but give people the option offline. Allow them to tailor the experience the way they want. And with the way you and your brothers play, you can't even get rid of that meter anymore. You can't mod it out because you need to see which buttons to press. So you can't even do that anymore, as we said a couple of shows ago when we heard that they'd made that change to alley-oops. So yeah, it's just dumb in my view.
And yeah, they preach skill gap, but then they throw about 80 artificial boosts in the game. Artificial, Andrew. Badges,
exactly.
Right? They preach skill gap, but they make it so, the game is absolutely flooded with canned sequences based on what you outfit a player with. So just miss me with the BS, honestly.
Before we go on, a reminder that the NLSC podcast comes out every week on the NLSC, nba-live.com, as well as our YouTube channel. We're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. If you're listening on any of those apps, we'd greatly appreciate a review. To keep up with the show and everything we're doing with basketball gaming in general, connect with us on social media. On Twitter and Facebook, we are the NLSC. We also have an Instagram, NLSC Basketball, and on YouTube, we're youtube.com/NBA Live Series Center. Once again, visit us at nba-live.com, where in addition to the podcast, you'll also find all of our original content, as well as our forum and modding community.
So let's get to dribbling. So feels too fast and often out of control. When you register an input, sometimes you don't get the animation you want. The ball still looks like it is awkwardly warping from hand to hand on so many dribbles. Back in the old motion system, it was a lot more user-friendly and made more sense. Like when you wanted to go behind the back, in a stationary position, you could do that, and you knew exactly how to do that. Dribbling, the pace of it also made a lot more sense. So, that's how I feel about that. Let's get to some non-gameplay aspects. So errors rosters, they are mostly untouched. The inaccuracies are across the board as far as player signature animations. The players are so incredibly underdone in the errors rosters. I've played multiple games in the Kobe era and LeBron era, and Andrew, miserable.
Shocking.
Absolutely miserable experience, kind of like what you and I had with NBA 2K25 when we were playing the errors rosters over Parsec. The disrespect is just huge. The people working on these rosters, they have absolutely no idea what they're doing as it relates to how these players played in real life, as it relates to their signature shots, how they moved on the floor. You put somebody like Amare Stoudemire out there or Sean Kemp, and they're absolute slugs. You can't do anything with them at all. Josh Smith is like using a Mack truck trying to do things with him. Absolutely terrible playing with Josh Smith. I just think it's such a shame because I can tell that these errors rosters and the accuracy of them are still incredibly low priority. And the best way to play this game, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later, is with the current teams by far, because those are the ones that got the most attention and they're the ones that play the best. But yeah, errors rosters, even with cyber faces, just basically everything is mostly untouched. I will say that there is a major improvement on David Robinson. They gave him a new face this year. It's probably the best David Robinson that I've seen in any 2K game ever.
It's not surprising, but it is disgraceful. It's disrespectful to the past, as we've said before. More importantly, it doesn't provide a great gameplay experience or authenticity, which is the whole point of my NBA eras. To still have that lack of attention to detail in the era's rosters is inexcusable. I've seen other people talk about issues such as Michael Jordan in the 90s having hair, using the wrong cyberface. There was an issue, I remember it was, I think 2K23 or 2K24, that he would have the right face, but a year later he would go back to having his 80s look, so that was weird. There's still issues with not moving on to the right artwork, even though the artwork is in the game. Just a lack of attention to detail, which again is the whole point of these modes. I will say, though, that is impressive that David Robinson has got a better face finally. He has been that player that really hasn't had that great face over the years, although NBA Live 2000 had a fantastic David Robinson face over a quarter of a century ago.
So I booted up the LeBron era roster, and my brother and I tried to jump into a game, and I was the Lakers at home, and the court is the Great Western Forum, right? I believe it's the 97-98 court, so that was wrong. Then we booted up two other teams, and the court was wrong. I believe the Bulls court is a mid-90s Bulls court, and not the one that the 10-11 Bulls played on. Noticed many inaccuracies just putting a few teams on the floor. But you know what? That would be somewhat okay if the players got the respect they deserved and the teams got the respect they deserved as far as the way they play on the court. Putting the 10-11 Hawks on the floor felt absolutely miserable. And that was an exciting, talented team overall. But using Josh Smith and Joe Johnson and Mike Bibby and whatnot, and all their shots just being wildly inaccurate and the players being so underdone, it was miserable. And combine that with the other gameplay issues that I just mentioned, it was unplayable. Like, we didn't even finish the game. So yeah, unbelievably disappointing there. There's broadcast view issues, Andrew. I think there's more of them on console than PC right now, at least from user reports. But the broadcast camera, the main one, not the broadcast stadium for the regular teams, but the main broadcast camera that you can customize more and whatnot, it has like zoom in, zoom out issues. It doesn't work like it did in NBA 2K25. It almost looks like a combination between broadcast and rail, like almost like a combination of the two. So I think that should probably be looked into. And then the last con that I'll mention right now is the player body models. Again, they did talk about enhanced lighting, and that is there, but the players still overall look like clay. So many of the body models are inaccurate. Players are missing, a muscle. It's the same bodies that we've seen, since like 2K20, 2K18, right? Like it's the same thing. It's the PS4 gen bodies starting in 2K18 and up. So yeah, that is still, a thing.
Well, sure, Derek, but what about the sweat and the cracked lips? The really important stuff.
I know, right? We're going to get into positives, and lighting is one of them, at least for the most part. So pros, rebounding. Rebounding feels as strong as it did in 2K25, with offensive rebounding not being as dominant, which is actually nice to see, to be honest, because offensive rebounding being too dominant has plagued the series for years. And this goes back to like the 2000s 2K's offensive rebounding was just too overpowering. It also feels like there's a more realistic balance on the boards in general, positionally. So yeah, the whole green rebound thing, all that stuff, it's not impacting our experience offline. And overall, I feel like rebounding is strong. Shooting is more streamlined this year, as it should be. I think overall it makes sense when shooting uncontested. However, when it comes to offline gameplay on All-Star and higher, the contest system still needs major work from a realism perspective. In turn, also a fun perspective, Andrew. Way too many shots that are considered heavily contested or even lightly contested shouldn't be. And I'm not even talking about if these shots were taken by NBA players. I'm talking about basketball players in general. I'm talking about players taking these shots at a men's league level, right? And so many times you'll take a shot where your defender, it's not a true contest, or his hand isn't even up, or he's like doing that fake invisible wall defense where you think you got by him and then you pull up, but he's like kind of in your vicinity and you brick a shot even though you time it well because it's being considered a contested shot. That sucks, right? And it makes me think about, our NBA 2K9 season where we can light it up with Ben Gordon and hit some of those semi-contested shots. It feels like the contest system in NBA 2K9 is far more realistic than 2K26. That's not good. I'm sure people get frustrated with this every now and then in the online space as well.
And this is something we talked about a few shows ago when we talked about green or miss, that being the approach to shooting this year. And once again, everybody says, or the shills rather say, get good, it's a skill issue, whatever. But these shooting mechanics need to play nice with the defensive mechanics. If you have a broken contest system, if that contest system can take away green releases or shorten the window to make contested shots with a green release, then that is a problem. Or if there's a badge that if a player gets nowhere near really contesting the player, but the radius for that badge to be able to affect the shooter is too big, then you see these problems with shooting. It comes down to the defensive mechanics. I've been playing some NBA Live 19 recently, Derek, actually enjoying it a little bit more. I will revisit the game in an article for Way Back Wednesday at some point in the not-too-distant future, but I am reminded that when you are so reliant on green releases, as you were in NBA Live 19, as you are in NBA 2K26, it does become a problem when the shot contest system can take away green releases too early, when a heavily contested shot can happen when the defender is not really in the vicinity, when they're not playing smothering defense, when they don't have a hand right in the face. So yeah, this is something we talked about before release, and I'm not surprised to hear that that is an issue. But by the same token, I am glad to hear that there are some positives there, and also that rebounding is not broken as we feared it might be with the new green rebounding system.
Yeah, I do also want to point out that shooting, I had a fear that green release meant swish, right? So we played on the higher difficulty levels on Superstar, All-Star, and whatnot, and it looks like it's been mixed up. So while it's green or miss, technically, there are some bounces. So we had one that bounced off the front of the rim, the back of the rim, and et cetera.
Nice.
So it's not. So that is also nice. But I want to say one more thing about the shooting. So the skill gap that they're talking about has absolutely nothing to do with making shooting realistic. It has to do with them trying to make this more like a fighting game, right? And we've talked about this before, and that has really hurt the experience both offline and online. In my opinion, it's not about if a shot would go in real life. It's about them trying to turn it into this thing where the changes that they're making has to do more with trying to make this like a fighting game as opposed to real basketball.
And of course, that again caters to the online elitists.
So this is both a pro and a con. So pushing back on the joystick to initiate a poster dunk in traffic, which, Andrew, was in 2K22 and is not a new feature by any means, but it was kind of announced that way. It can be helpful. However, this can cause some awkward, unrealistic forced drives, and the meter that accompanies these drives cannot be turned off. A pro is the lighting. I do think that it looks better with the current teams. However, it does look a little unnatural with some of the classic teams. But, we had a game where I was using the Pelicans and my brother was using the Clippers, and the arena lighting overall looked solid. There's more sweat on the players. Actually, I don't know if they were inspired by Lagoa on the NLSC forums, but the progressive sweat is actually very good in this game, and you can actually see the shine on the players from the gameplay view, and you can see the shine getting more intense as you play through a game. It did look really cool as we got into the second half of the Pelicans game where, I was being play initiator Zion, and you could see the shine on his shoulders and the sweat and everything, and going into his moves and everything. It looked cool, Andrew, right? And it reminded me of playing NBA 2K14 with Lagoa's 6.0 global mod that he had. So I think that the courts do have a little bit more detail. Do I think that this game has as much detail as 2K14, as so many people like to compare it to? No, I think there's still more detail in NBA 2K14, better reflections, better lighting overall, better, jersey quality and jersey movement and all of that. But I think NBA 2K26 with the default regular teams does look a little bit better than 2K25 with the new lighting.
And that is good to see. I mean, gameplay is paramount. We say that so often. We stand by that sentiment. But you still want these games to look amazing on the current generation. Sure, we're not going to see the same leaps we did going from 6th to 7th generation, 7th to 8th generation, but you still want to see the power of the current generation properly harnessed from a visual standpoint. So it is nice that they have made some enhancements there.
I do like the rhythm shooting. I've actually used it quite a bit over the last couple games where, you pass it to the corner and you hold the back left trigger and you basically shoot the ball from where you catch it. That's assuming you get a clean catch animation, Andrew, but sometimes the catch animations in this game are super delayed, and sometimes they jump to catch the ball when nobody in their right mind would ever jump in that situation. But when you do get a clean catch, you can go right into your shot. It is quicker. It's intuitive. I do enjoy the rhythm shooting, and I hope that stays in the game. In the future, it allows you to set your feet quicker as well. And I'm going to give this as both pro and a con to close the section out. So as it relates to pro play, I don't think it's really pro play that's at fault here as it relates to the added frustrations. Overall, I like pro play, and I love the way it was utilized in 2K25. I think the added frustrations, the ones that I mentioned in my cons list related to the player movement, related to the stuff they put back in from 2K24 as it relates to the bumping, the contest system, all of that stuff. I think that's getting in the way of something like pro play shining, and that's unfortunate.
I've seen some other people express similar sentiments about pro play. And like you said, there are clearly some advantages to it. We talked about that last year with NBA 2K25 and how it did bring that authenticity, how we did think there was great potential in that technology. But once again, maybe it's a case of too many different technologies that don't really play nice with each other, just not meshing in 2K26, especially if they have brought in some new tech here and there. Sure, maybe it's not built from the ground up, maybe it's not brand new tech across the board, maybe they did oversell it, but it does sound like there is some new tech in there, and maybe it's not playing nice with what they had before.
So yeah, one more thing I want to point out too, the game is faster. I think Mike Wong stated that 10% that's 10% faster than 2K25. And that's not necessarily a bad thing in certain situations. Like when you're running fast breaks, sometimes it can be fast and fun, right? But I think that sometimes the animations themselves play out too fast. And I think that goes for when you're dribbling, etc. Some of the drives to the hoop. Sometimes the action in NBA 2K26 just looks kind of frantic. And I think that's also the case when you watch the online gameplay. It's always looked frantic, in my opinion, in the past, especially starting with, the changes of the new motion system with 2K18. I talked about it way back then, right? You and I had those conversations where it's like, I can't believe this is being promoted with the 2K League, right? Like, I can't believe that the way this action looks is being promoted because it doesn't look good, right? It doesn't really look fun at all. And it looks like there's like exploits everywhere and whatnot. But, yeah, I think that the online gameplay that I've seen with 2K26 just looks absolutely out of control. I think it looks super frantic. And I think sometimes it feels that way in the offline gameplay as well. But I don't hate the speed of this game. What I dislike is just the constant skating, the invisible walls, the suction, the super janky movement, the weird change of pace when players are running or pushing the ball, where their back straightens and then it goes forward and then it straightens again and their speed is altering. And then before you know it, you think you have a free layup. And then from 5 feet away, somebody gets suctioned into you and they block you or they make you miss what should have been an open layup, etc. Like, those are the issues I have. It's not as much about the speed of the game. It's all of those other issues. So, in closing, I do want to say this. The best way to play this game right now, Andrew, is using the current teams and using them in offline modes. Maybe stick to play now or start a My NBA. Tender love and care was put into the current teams from the animation perspective, but also as it relates to ratings, tendencies, and badges. The most fun we have had so far, and by far, is using the current teams in a head-to-head fashion, either on Pro, All-Star, or Superstar. The Era's rosters are so underwhelming. It was instant frustration. The players are so underdone. Signatures are wrong across the board, and it makes using those teams feel sluggish and crappy. So we have gotten some enjoyment out of 2K26, mostly from that head-to-head current teams perspective. And I did upload a gameplay video, Warriors versus Kings, where I was the Kings and my brother was the Warriors, and there was some positive comments on that gameplay, but then also people stating, like they did to that other creator, this looks like 2K25, right? So much of 2K25 is in this, blah, blah, blah. So, yeah, I think we were able to make that footage look pretty good in that head-to-head current team atmosphere. But there's a lot of 2K25 in this. The new motion system thing, that announcement was mostly false advertising, in my opinion. The skating is still there in a major way, if not the same as 2K25, potentially worse. All of that. So, like, when you get your hands on this game, temper your expectations. I think that's what you were doing, Andrew, right? When you get your hands on this game, expect a lot of 2K25 and a lot of stuff that I just mentioned, and do your best to get enjoyment out of this game if you decide to pick it up. Play the modes that you want. Don't feel pressured to go into, the online space if you don't want to. One of the biggest cons, and we can't go without talking about this, Andrew, is obviously the money grab, right? We talked about the money grab in my team. We talked about the money grab in my career, in the online connected modes. That needs to be referenced here. whatever they can do to get money out of the consumer over the price of the base game, they're doing it, and it's working. So most of their income is not off of game sales, it's off of microtransactions and whatnot, as mentioned in multiple articles, which we discussed on prior shows. So the greed is still there. A lot of the gameplay issues that you had with 2K25 are still going to be there, and potentially some new ones. But my brothers and I are going to try to get the most out of this game because we already bought it. We're going to be playing the WNBA modes. We're going to be sticking to offline gameplay, and we'll probably be using the current teams quite a bit.
Yeah, you haven't exactly raised my expectations or hopes for the game. Not surprising, still disappointing, of course. But like I said, keeping those expectations low and still keeping an open mind as much as I can. I'll see how I enjoy it. Maybe it will surprise me this year. Maybe I did have too many other things that I was enjoying at the time last year to really give NBA 2K25 a chance. That has been the case. I have been leaning very heavily towards retro gaming in recent years, so it has been hard to appreciate even the better NBA 2K releases on this generation. So yeah, low expectations, an open mind, we'll see what we think, but I do suspect that I will have very similar thoughts to you.
I asked the community, for those of you that have already played NBA 2K26, what are your first impressions of the game? And here are some responses from Twitter. Cookie.69 already refunded the game. He stated fluid controls. That's about it. Refunded already. Chosen One at King J Mace states that my career is actually good. Shooting is clean, and I'm surprised at the gameplay. I do think that shooting is an improvement overall over 2K25, so I agree with you there. Munda Bompton at Poopton_man Andrew states, I am so happy we have addressed many of the missing players issue for the era's rosters. Yes, some newly added players don't look like themselves, example Aminu, but we have their data and stats. So with cyberfaces and mods, we will finally have a close to perfect classic roster. There's going to be a lot of editing needed on those rosters, but it is nice to see when they add new players, and I did see that some 60s and 70s players were also added in my team as well, with cyberfaces and all. And we've talked about it before, Andrew. It's nice to have the data in the game, right? So even though the My NBA era's rosters are so underdone and they were low priority, clearly from a player creation perspective, a lot of that art is in there and the faces are in there so people can go to town with editing that content.
Oh yeah, we'd much rather have that content in the game than not. It gives us a much better base to work with. But once again, disappointing that they're not showing respect to past eras and of course the audience by not providing that authenticity.
DK4 at FIBA Reeves states, I would also like to know how smooth the gameplay is. Is there a big difference compared to 2K25? So it's very similar to 2K25. Gameplay is a bit faster. But I also find that at this point, there's more frustrations with the gameplay, as I outlined in the cons section, than 2K25. But if you like 2K25, which I know FIBA Reeves was playing that game, you may get enjoyment out of this one. T Gentry at Bucky_T states, looking like 2K25. Similar commentary. CPU looks clueless on D. Invisible bodies that still bump you on D. Players move faster, but it looks unrealistic. Layup meter is dumb. Same bump out of bounds animation. That animation actually plays out quite a bit, where you get bumped out of bounds, or your player just unnaturally, awkwardly steps out of bounds because you're kind of like skating around and don't really have full control of your player. That definitely happens quite a bit in that game. He states we really need that eco motion system back, Andrew. To hell with pro play. So he's loving the eco motion, just like you. I think that the CPU moves more unnaturally on D in this game. I think that sometimes on offense they're smarter, as in extra passes and more ball movement, but almost to the point where it's unrealistic from a real NBA perspective when you're using real NBA teams, because you'll have them consistently kind of wasting out the shot clock, and that doesn't happen much in today's NBA, right? Like dribbling around, overpassing, etc. And from a current NBA perspective, that doesn't happen that often. But yeah, he has a lot of the same opinions as I do on basketball video games. And yeah, like he states, looking a lot like 2K25.
Yeah, and that EcoMotion engine, what an accomplishment on that generation. Still the best the game has felt, in my view.
Jason Paul at that J Paul states, the worst playing 2K I've ever touched. I've liked modern 2Ks quite a bit, but this feels like something EA would release in 2007. Is that a shot at NBA Live 07, Andrew? As it should be. Fast, twitchy, arcadey, and sky-high field goal percentages, a big departure from Sim Hoops. So I agree that there's definitely a departure from Sim Hoops, and not just in the NBA, just like realistic basketball in general. But as far as sky-high field goal percentages, I'm guessing they're seeing a little bit more of that online because it's so impossible as a user oftentimes to stay in front of your player because of the poor foot planning, because the offense is moving so fast. When you're playing offline and you're playing, let's say, on Superstar against the CPU, you will not have a high field goal percentage. I would almost guarantee you that, Jason. It's because of the way the contest system works, because of how fast the computer is moving on defense. My recommendation for those playing offline is to stick with Pro or All-Star or head-to-head with another human on Superstar, because the action gets more frustrating the higher you go with the difficulty levels.
And he mentions that he has been enjoying games this generation. And that's an important point, because so often when you talk about the latest game not being the greatest game, people will just bash nostalgia, and they'll say, oh, you're just nostalgic for the games, you think they were good, they really weren't, or you were a child and it was your childhood that you miss, and when everything was nice and fresh and new, and you're just jaded and bitter, cynical these days. And that's an asinine argument to begin with, but it falls apart when somebody like Jay says, I've been enjoying recent games, but this one is not as fun, because nostalgia is not in effect here. Recent games have been to his liking, to a certain extent, but NBA 2K26 isn't. So that's another reason why the nostalgia argument is just incredibly lazy and apologist rhetoric. Once again, it's a bad argument to begin with, because there are things about older games, much older games, not NBA Live 07 of course, that were better than more recent titles. But to his point, when you are enjoying recent games and the newest one doesn't delight you as much, it's certainly not a case of nostalgia goggles.
If you can clearly and intelligently explain the issues that you have with a current product and how it was better, with a past version of that product, or state this is how it can be improved, more than likely you're not operating off of nostalgia. Andrew, you're just telling it like it is. Stephen at the Live King states, it's probably the best 5v5 in a long time. The collision system is still suspect, but I found ways to clean it up. The game speed is literally perfect for the first time ever in a 2K game. Definitely a lot of gameplay positives. I don't hate the game speed, as I mentioned. I agree with you that the collision system is definitely suspect with those invisible walls and the suction and all of that stuff. I'm glad you're enjoying it, and I think you're going to make a lot of great videos with NBA 2K26. And I do see some of the positives in gameplay, which is why I stated we might be able to get enough out of it this year like we did with 2K25, where it is, where we got our money's worth and whatnot, because we'll play that WNBA content and the current team content. But I definitely have some issues with the gameplay. At the Life of P24 _ states, I love it. A. Wilkes states, definitely more fun, but I'm not sure at what cost yet. Curry for Free at Curry for 301 states, the graphics are definitely better and the gameplay feels a little more smooth. Kitsune Forever at Flavio _ Arthur RN states, the best since 2K20. So he was fond of 2K20. Shaquille at Hatfield at It's Shaq 1995 states, no defense and everybody can shoot. And Sir Jam at Sir Jam 34 states, the graphics are better. Still a suction on defense on user fast breaks, as we mentioned earlier, Andrew. Still an invisible force field on drives. 2K25.5 for now. So, there's the 2K25.5 thing. He's talking about the invisible walls. I'm not the only one talking about this stuff, Andrew. The suction, the invisible walls. It dramatically impacts the gameplay. And for those who are not talking about it, those who are not voicing their displeasure on social media, most of the time it's affecting them too. So, that's it from Twitter, Andrew. Anything you wanted to add?
Well, obviously when it comes to the annual releases, we're not always going to see that huge jump each and every year of a generation. So the whole, it's the last game 0.5, or it feels like a patch, a slightly better version, or pretty much the same as last year's game, is not altogether surprising. But the problem is that the developer blogs oversold it. They sold this as this generational leap within a generation, and of course we were skeptical. We took it with a grain of salt, but there are a lot of claims in those blogs, and there have been in recent years, and of course that does lead to the previous game that was being hyped up at one point, being thrown under the bus. We've talked about that before. That is what a lot of people are calling out, us included, that the developer blogs promised so much more. They promised a brand new experience. Certainly a lot of content creators said the same. So for it to be so familiar, even if it is better, and certainly if you're enjoying the game, that is good news. That's what we all want. Unfortunately, it's not what we all get with different preferences and expectations. But when this game is being sold by both the developer blogs and content creators as a huge leap, as this revolution, putting all the previous releases to shame, and it's not, yeah, that deserves to be called out.
2K25 was a bigger leap over 2K24 than 2K26 over 2K25.
There you go.
I'll say that right now. By a lot for me, to be honest with you. Moving over to Discord, Cookie Dot states, more fluid but too fast for me. Other than that, it's basically 2K25. But, Cookie Dot, according to creators out there, you are dumb for saying that. Or you suck at the game, or both, because you said it looked like 2K25. But yeah, how silly is that? So yeah, Andrew, that's it for the community responses to the community question. I do want to point out an important note. It was announced that and this was from 2K Dev Evan, who I believe is the one that stated he never knew when to time a rebound, so green rebounds are a good idea. He stated that 2K Share doesn't work like it did in 2K25, so it's not cross-platform anymore. So for 2K26, your PC rosters are separated from console users and vice versa. So where we had the ability to use the rosters that were made on consoles on PC, we could download them off of 2K Share. We can't do that this year. So that is pretty unfortunate.
That was definitely a bummer to hear. And it does make you wonder what the situation was last year. That was a pleasant surprise, considering there isn't any crossplay between the modes, My Team and My Career, as there is on console. So that was a pleasant surprise last year. It does make you wonder if that was intentional. Not everything that benefits modding is intentional or done with modding in mind, I should say. I remember talking to some of the developers of the early NBA Live games, talking about the DBF files that made roster editing so easy and so accessible from NBA Live 98 onwards on PC. And he mentioned that it wasn't done with modding in mind. It was just a new way for them to store data as they were developing the game and to update the rosters. And they just continued to use that method in the finished product as well. It wasn't just an internal development thing. It became a part of the game's file formats. So it was a happy accident that we got DBF files and all the benefits to roster modding that entailed. So it does make me wonder if last year's cross-platform sharing with the rosters was intended. Also makes me wonder if there was any issues with hacking. Because once again, I understand why there isn't cross-play from that perspective. The hacking that goes on PC, although of course that is harder, as I understand it, with the anti-cheat, as it should be. And as much as that does affect modding, the anti-cheat, it is good from a gaming perspective to not have those hack players online. Absolutely ruins the online scene, which is toxic enough and problematic enough as it is. But it does make me wonder if there was some issues there, or if it was just a happy accident that they've decided, we don't want to do that anymore. Either way, though, a bummer, because people would make these great rosters on one platform, and then to be able to share it across platforms and between console and PC, so great last year. I've also heard that some of the files are encrypted, so modding is probably going to be a little bit tougher this year, at least at the beginning. Yeah, not the best news for modding.
I don't think the roster sharing thing in 2K25 was an accident. I think what happened is they used 2K25 to test it out to see if it would work, to see if there were going to be any issues with it. But I believe that potentially modded rosters became a problem where there were players that were in the files that people were able to add to rosters on PC. And when that was shared and could be downloaded by console users, those players weren't officially licensed in the game. There was a reason they weren't put in the game in offline modes. Maybe they were exclusive to My Team, but now they were available, right? When, in offline, because on PC, you could plug in that player's cyberface number and get him in the roster. So my opinion is if it was shut off, it could have been for two reasons. That one, or possibly due to it being more maintenance for the company to try to control that whole situation, the cross-platform sharing, to make it work, or a combination of both.
Yeah, probably right there, come to think of it. But thank you to everybody who shared their impressions so far. Please keep that conversation going. Impressions can change over the course of a game's release cycle. Sometimes patches make games better, sometimes they make them worse. Sometimes, as we get used to the mechanics, we can come to enjoy them as much as possible. First impressions don't always last. That being said, Derek, I think I'm going to have very similar impressions to you, and very similar impressions to what I had of NBA 2K25. But once again, going to keep an open mind, going to come at the game with low expectations, and we'll see how I feel.
Yeah, I want people to love this game, right? And I want to love this game. And I want my brothers and I to create memories with the game, and we're still going to try to, right? But yeah, I'm just still surprised that the issues that I mentioned, which are so glaring, especially the janky movement and the weird change of direction and the sliding all over the court and the invisible walls and the constant clipping and all in that, like, I am really surprised that in 2025 that this is allowed in a sports game, that this is being created in a AAA sports game, and that it's not highlighted more. This should be in all the reviews for these games. It should be highlighted, just like the VC stuff, right? Just like the greed and everything. But yeah, we're going to try to make the most of it. I do hope that, patches come through that fix some of the issues that I mentioned, but I'm not super optimistic about that, Andrew.
Well, when it comes to the reviews, it's a very similar situation to the independent content creators. If they want that early access, if they want the perks, if they want to get those review copies ahead of time and not be blacklisted, these media outlets, these publications, they need to play nice as well. It's a real shame.
Yeah. Like, how do you do a review for this game and not highlight the false advertising, right? How do you do a review for this game and not highlight they announced that it was a new motion system and it's not? How do you do a review for this game where they said, where it's not highlighted, that they said skating is eliminated, like there's no skating is what they said. And that there's just skating all over the place. It's no improvement from what I could tell from 2K25 and whatnot. And worse in some cases. I just it blows my mind how many people just can be silenced, or how many people will do whatever they possibly can to keep their perks and keep their sponsors and keep their influence and all of that. It's like, say something, speak up.
Indeed. With that being said, we will not be silenced, we will not be shouted down, and we will continue to tell it to you straight. And of course, that includes any change of heart. If we do come to like the game better, if we do find that the game is worse the more we play it, we're going to let you know. But either way, we're going to be honest, Derek.
I hope people that listen to the show appreciate the transparency, right? Honest with our takes, whether it comes to the NBA Live series. I have stated countless times my issues with NBA Live 19. Right. And the issues that I also had with NBA Live 18, which you like more than I do, the faults that games like NBA Live 15 and 16 had, the absolutely embarrassing game that NBA Live 14 was,
sure.
NBA Live 07, talked about that many times, NBA Live 08, which was an improvement, but was a really, really poor release overall, in my opinion, with the series from a gameplay perspective. So, yeah, I hope people appreciate the transparency when we talk about basketball video games, and basketball in real life, how we feel about the current game, and the game's past and whatnot.
We are passionate about these things, so we're going to talk about them with enthusiasm and honesty. With that being said, that has brought us to the end of this week's show. As always, thank you for tuning in, and please join us again next week and every week on the NLSC, nb-live.com, our YouTube channel, or wherever you listen to podcasts. In the meantime, make sure you're following us on social media. That's where you can get in touch with us, and of course, stay up to date with all of our content. So, Derek, go ahead and plug the handles.
Yeah, you can reach me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at D43G and at D4384. I'm also on YouTube, D43, and on the NLSC, D43.
As for me, I'm Andrew in the forum and Andrew NLSC on X and Blue Sky. The NLSC is on X, Facebook, and Blue Sky at the NLSC. We're also NLSC Basketball on Instagram and Threads. We're on YouTube at NBA Live Series Center. And of course, give a look to the NLSC itself, nb-live.com, for everything we do for basketball video games. So, thank you once again for tuning in, and until next time, I'm Andrew.
And I'm Derek.
Go get buckets, everyone.